ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the international webinar on potential on Messon's simultaneous treatment of oral submucous fibrosis, organized by Meeting Fora in association with iRaj Webinars. On the behalf of entire organizing committee, I'm Isaac Behra, organizing secretary. Would like to welcome you all for this webinar. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce our organization. The motto behind this non-profit association is to bridge the gap between students, professors, academics, and industrialists from multidiscipline. Apart from organizing various seminars, expert talks, and conferences, we have various highly rated multidisciplinary journals in the field of science, engineering, technology, and management. Since our inception, we have been arranged various international conferences at various parts of the world, like New York, London, Australia, Hong Kong, Dubai, Bangkok, Kuala Lumpur, India, etc. More than 1 lakh research papers have been published during our journey. Today, I'm glad to welcome you all as a member of this fastest growing network for the advancement of science and technology in terms of research and innovation. Today, we were very much fortunate to have an eminent professor and expert who is joining this webinar as an expert speaker and guest. Her name is Professor Dr. Neha Patil. Presently, she is working as an assistant professor, PhD scholar, molecular biology, MG, CH, Navi Mumbai. Now I'd like to welcome our Professor Dr. Neha Patil to deliver the webinar.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Dr. Neha Patil, Assistant Professor in Oral Medicine and Radiology, PhD Scholar in Molecular Biology from MGM Institute of Health Sciences, Navi Mumbai. And I thank you, I thank Meeting Fora, who in association with iRaj Webinars, who arrange such webinars wherein we can share our views and enhance our knowledge. So thank you very much for this platform. I will be talking on potential of mesenchymal cells in treatment of oral submucous fibrosis. We'll be going about the presentation under the following headings. Introduction, wherein we'll have a look at the background of what this condition is and what we mean by using stem cells for this condition. What is oral submucous fibrosis? The history and the epidemiology of this disease, etiology and pathophysiology of oral submucous fibrosis, the present treatment options which are used for this condition, mesenchymal stem cells and their application in the management of oral submucous fibrosis. We discuss how they can be of potential use over the present treatment options available and the future prospects. So let's begin with the oral cavity. The oral cavity, as we all know, consists of teeth and the supporting tissues like the gingiva, the periodontal ligament, along with the alveolar bone, and the other organs which are in association with the oral cavity, like the tongue, the salivary glands, and the palate, and obviously the lips and the anterior portion of our throat, what we call. All this assists in proper eating, proper deglutition, proper speaking. So all the functions of the oral cavity are based upon a synchronized functions of all these organs together. What is common in all these organs is the oral mucous membrane. It's a very unique kind of a membrane, and it is constantly exposed to a variety of mechanical and chemical irritants, microorganisms, and temperature changes. By mechanical irritants, we mean that there is always some kind of mechanical trauma or irritation which is constantly happening to the membrane. Why? Because of the kind of food that we eat. Sometimes the food is very coarse, which constantly irritates the membrane. There are a lot of chemical irritants which are present in the food as compared to the acidity, considering a very acidic substance which we consume at a time, or the microorganisms which are there in the caries on the tooth which are present, or on the tongue, or in the gingiva, and the temperature changes to which the oral mucous membrane is always exposed to, like very hot temperatures when we are eating something very hot, like pizzas or some drinks which are very hot, and similarly as opposed to very cold temperatures also. So the oral mucous membrane is constantly exposed to all these variety of irritation. But the epithelium and the connective tissue of this mucous membrane, they have an adaptive changes to all these irritants which are present, but up to a certain limit. Beyond the limit, there are always reactive changes which the oral mucous membrane shows, and one of these changes is oral submucous fibrosis. So what we mean by oral submucous fibrosis is the definition says it's an insidious chronic disease that affects any part of the oral cavity and sometimes the pharynx, although occasionally preceded by or associated with formation of vesicles. It is always associated with juxtaepithelial inflammatory cell reaction, followed by fibroelastic changes of the lamina propria and epithelial atrophy, which leads to stiffness of the oral mucosa, leading to trismus and inability to eat. Now, though the definition may seem very long and difficult to learn, but it conveys the exact meaning. By this, we mean that it says that the condition of oral submucous fibrosis is a chronic condition which is seen in the oral cavity and also parts of pharynx. It is always or generally preceded with the formation of small vesicles which are there over the buccal mucosa or maybe over the palate. And after this, what we see is an inflammatory reaction. And post this inflammation, why is the inflammation? The inflammation is mainly to the irritant which is present. We'll see what the irritant is. And after the inflammation, what we have is fibroelastic changes in the connective tissue. And because of this increase in fibrosis, it leads to stiffness of the oral mucosa, and then the patient is not able to open his mouth, that is trismus, and he cannot eat. Okay, so the word itself means oral submucous fibrosis, that is fibrosis in the submucosa of the oral cavity. Now, this is not a condition which has come up now. It has been mentioned in ancient Vedic literature as well, which was mentioned some around 1000 to 2000 years before. So even there is mention of this condition. But the researchers who started studying this condition and started reporting about this was somewhere around in the 1950s, when Schwartz in 1952 described this condition in 5 African women of Indian origin. The next year, the term submucous fibrosis was coined by Joshi, who made same observations among people in the city of Mumbai. And in 1954, similar cases were reported by Sue P. from Taiwan. So after this, the research on this topic started. And then still the research is going on because the exact cause, though it is known, we have not found any particular or a very bang-on management for this condition. Since then, there have been many names which are proposed for this condition, depending upon what the researcher could see clinically or what he could understand from the clinical observations which he made, like atrophica, idiopathic mucosa oris, or diffuse oral submucous fibrosis. Some called it submucous fibrosis of the palate or cheek. So the terms have been always being added or removed or may have been made more precise, but the common or a more universal term which is used for this condition is oral submucous fibrosis, which was given in 1964 by Pingberg and Sitzak. If you look at the epidemiology of this condition, we see that this is more prevalent in India, in the Southeast Asian countries, and East Africa. Among the Indian subcontinent, India and Burma, they have shown many patients of oral submucous fibrosis. And in India, if you see the southern parts of India, the southern states of India have larger number of such patients. These are the clinical manifestations which the disease presents with. What we see here is the right and the left buccal mucosa of the patient. We can see fibrosis, which is there. The normal color of the mucosa, as we know, is pink or coral pink. That color is lost because we see more whitish or grayish appearance. We see more fibrosis over this area, which gives a marble-like appearance to the mucosa. There is stiffness, which you can see in the raphe region, because of which the patient has difficulty opening mouth. If we observe the labial and the lingual gingiva, same appearance of fibrosis can be seen on the inner aspects of the lip. We can see inflammation over the gingiva. What is involved is also the posterior aspects of the palate, the uvula, which either shows a bud shape appearance or a hockey stick appearance. We can see the fibrosis in the parietal area and the pterygomandibular raphe region. Because of this fibrosis and stiffness, what we see is the protrusion of the tongue, which is hampered. The patient is not able to protrude the tongue enough to eat and speak properly, and the mouth opening. The mouth opening is severely restricted depending upon what stage of oral submucous fibrosis the patient presents with. Usually the mouth opening is somewhere around 4 fingers, or we can say 45 to 50 mm. But as the stage progresses, we see further reduction in the mouth opening. So if we see such clinical features, what the patient presents with is burning sensation to spicy food or even to normal spicy food. This is because of the inflammation which is present in the oral mucosa. There is restricted mouth opening because of the fibrosis, inability to blow or whistle. Same thing, because of the fibrosis, the elasticity of the mucosa is lost and patient is not able to blow or whistle, difficulty swallowing, and there is change in the consistency of the saliva also because of the fibrosis which sets in. Even the salivary gland, the function is hampered, and so the patient complains of xerostomia or dry mouth. Because of these symptoms, it is not only the oral cavity which is affected, but what is also affected is the patient's psychological, social, and even his quality of life. Why? Because there is difficulty in opening mouth, there is difficulty in eating, the patient has problems with social contact, social eating, he cannot speak properly, and there is always a fear of malignant transformation because the condition is known to show at least 3 to 30% chance wherein squamous cell carcinoma is seen in patients with oral submucous fibrosis. So once they know about this condition which they are affected with, there is always a psychological imbalance and the whole quality of life of the patient is compromised. So what is the cause? What is the basic irritant which is causing this condition? Since the research started, there have been many things which have been postulated as possible etiological factors for the condition to persist, like areca nut, the use of chilies, nutritional deficiencies, immunologic and genetic factors, chronic intraoral irritation, alcoholism, or defective iron metabolism. But amongst all these topics which are researched, areca nut is a constant etiological agent and the major one. Areca nut, as we know, or betel nut, or supari, what we call, has been used worldwide. If we see, China has the most tobacco users, around 300.8 million, followed by India, around 274.9 million. And if we see particularly the smokeless form, that is supari or areca nut, or any of the other smokeless forms like mawa, gutka, pan masala, India has almost 205.9 million users of these non-smokeless form of tobacco. Areca nut has historical mentions also, because in Hinduism, it is considered auspicious to use areca nut in religious ceremonies and also given to people whom we honor. It is also used in marriage ceremonies. It is used for its breath freshening and relaxing properties, used by many since ages because it is a nervous system stimulant and it gives a sense of well-being and euphoria. In Ayurveda, chewing areca nut is a good remedy for deworming and also prevents halitosis. So this has always been a history wherein areca nut has been used in history for so many reasons. But if we see the modern day consumption, it shows a different picture. Pan masala, which is a form of this supari, which is a combination of areca nut, satechu, cardamom with many flavoring and artificial coloring agents. It has been used extensively by young people, even school-going children and females, because of the marketing gimmicks, attractive packaging, and being very cheap and easily available. Poor people who may only eat every other day use this to control their hunger pangs. And owing to its stimulant properties, industrial workers and vehicular drivers use it to remain alert during the longer working hours. So we see a drastic difference in the way areca nut was consumed earlier and with the modern day consumption. So let's see the pathogenesis by which areca nut causes oral submucous fibrosis. There are 4 ways by which areca nut seems to cause oral submucous fibrosis. The very first is occurrence of chronic inflammation at the site of betel quid placement. That means a patient who places areca nut at a particular area, there is chronic inflammation in this area because of the mechanical and chemicals which leach out from the areca nut, and they constantly irritate the oral mucous membrane. There is diffusion of the alkaloids and flavonoids into the connective tissue, which causes chronic inflammation. And if we see at the cellular or molecular level, there's increase in cytokines or tumor necrosis factors, alpha and interleukin 6. So because of this, the chronic inflammation sets in, and because of the chronic inflammation, the patient complains of burning sensation or ulceration or redness of the mucosa. The second is increased collagen synthesis. Areca nut causes increase in the TGF-beta levels, which causes activation of pro-collagen gene. And this pro-collagen gene causes increase in collagen production. So this leads to fibrosis. The third is it causes cross-linking of this collagen. So with increase in collagen production, there is also cross-linking. This is why, because of the increased copper levels in the fluids in patients who eat areca nut on a regular basis, this causes upregulation of lysyl oxidase. And because of this, there is cross-linking of the collagen fibers. And the last is it causes decrease in the collagen degradation. This is through the pathway of TIMP, which is activated. And because of this activation of TIMP, there is less degradation. So chronic inflammation along with increased synthesis of collagen, with cross-linking of the collagen and decrease in the degradation of the collagen, all this leads to oral submucous fibrosis. What are the present treatment options available for this condition? They are either categorized into non-surgical or surgical, depending upon the stage of oral submucous fibrosis the patient presents with. For earlier stages, wherein the patient has somewhere mouth opening around 30 mm and above, we use non-surgical mode of treatment strategies like multivitamins and antioxidants. They are given mainly because there is a lot of oxidative stress in oral submucous fibrosis. To combat that, we use more multivitamins and antioxidants. Steroids or topical intralesional injection, either topical or intralesional injection of steroids are given. They are known anti-inflammatory agents, and they are known to reduce fibrosis post-inflammation. So steroids have been always the mainstay of any case with oral submucous fibrosis. The other things which are usually associated or given in combination with steroid are lycopene. They are effective antioxidants and it reduces the reactive oxygen species and the nitrogen species. Pentoxifidin, it is a known anti-inflammatory agent, fibrinolytic agent, and it also has immunomodulatory properties. Hyaluronidase injection. Hyaluronidase is a potent fibrinolytic. So in combination with steroid, it helps in reducing the fibrosis and also taking care of the inflammation. So this is also used, and newer research has been towards the use of curcumin, which has a multi-targeted effect. Like it is a very nice antioxidant, anti-inflammatory agent, and anti-fibrotic agent. So these are the non-surgical options which are available for oral submucous fibrosis. And when the stage is very advanced, surgical options like fibrotomy or coronoidectomy or temporalis myotomy followed by reconstruction and skin grafting is what is used. So this is how they are used. Lycopene is used for 2 months, pentoxifilin somewhere around 7 months, steroids for almost 3 months, whether topical or intralesional. Turmeric also has to be used for 3 months. So if we see the duration of the use of all these agents, the main problem lies in this, the longer duration of treatment which is required. So it causes some side effects which obviously intervene when we are using any medication for such a long time. The patient compliance is heavily affected. Why? Because we cannot expect the patient to keep on using medication 3 times a day for a period of about 5 to 7 months. So we lose them to follow up. And because of these dropped out cases, or wherein the patient cannot compile or the patient cannot have a proper compliance to the treatment, there is chances that it is going to turn into malignancy, and then the patient reports back with a full-blown malignancy, like most commonly squamous cell carcinoma. And even in advanced stages where surgery is used, the results and prognosis is questionable. Why? Because after surgery, the surgical scars which are there, they also heal with fibrosis. So sometimes we are inducing more fibrosis after the surgery which is there. Considering these problems, the newer research has been towards the use of stem cells. What are these stem cells? They are defined as immature or undifferentiated cells that are capable of generating daughter cells identical to themselves, or which can differentiate into diverse other cellular phenotypes. So in simple words, these are body's raw material, cells from which other cells with specialized functions can be generated. So if we see the type of stem cells, we can categorize them according to the differentiation or on the basis of their origin. If we see the differentiation, they can be categorized as pluripotent, multipotent, or totipotent cells, depending upon how many or how diverse cell types they can differentiate into. And on the basis of their origin, if we get the stem cells from embryos or embryonic stem cells, either from the fetus or from the infant, from the umbilical cord, or from the Wharton's jelly, which is also gelatinous substance in the umbilical cord, or from the adult, like from the mesenchyme, or from the bone marrow, or from the hepatic or the pancreatic cell. So depending upon from where we get them, we can categorize stem cells into these two broad categories. What is the hypothesis of using these mesenchymal stem cells in oral submucous fibrosis? These are the properties because of which there has been research over using these stem cells over the present treatment option. One is it has low immunogenicity. That means as they lack MHC, that is major histocompatibility complex 1, and they have low MHC1 expression, so they are suitable for this transplantation. They can differentiate into various functional cells, and they have this immunomodulatory effects. Efficiency is relatively higher in immune and inflammation mediated diseases. Oral submucous fibrosis is a known inflammatory or reactive condition. So the efficiency of stem cells has been good or better in such kind of conditions. They are relatively safe. They have properties of immunomodulation. They have anti-inflammatory properties. They are anti-fibrotic. They are pro-angiogenic. That means they are known to build up more angiogenesis, and they are antioxidants. So basically, whatever we require for the condition to persist, to compensate for the loss of functions which oral submucous fibrosis show, mesenchymal cells completely stand to the required level. So let's see the properties, how mesenchymal cells are used for oral submucous fibrosis. The very first is anti-inflammatory effect. In oral submucous fibrosis, as we saw, there is local microtrauma, and because of this microtrauma, there is inflammation. And in the inflammation, what we have is increase in the levels of TNF alpha and interleukin-1. So when mesenchymal cells are present, they secrete interleukin-10, which suppresses this TNF alpha and downregulates TNF alpha and interleukin-6, which causes decrease in the inflammation, because the inflammatory mediators like the CD4 cells, T cells, and TNF alpha, they are reduced in their expression, and we have a control over the inflammation which is present in the mucosa. The anti-fibrotic effect in oral submucous fibrosis that we saw, the Erica-NET causes increase in the TGF beta levels. And because of this, there is increase in the myofibroblast, which causes collagen production to increase. These mesenchymal cells, they directly inhibit this TGF beta. And because of the inhibition of this, the myofibroblasts which are present, they also decrease in number. And so we can take care of the collagen production, which is happening because of the increased TGF beta level. Antioxidative potential, like we saw, we use antioxidants and multivitamins. Why? Because there is oxidative stress which is present in oral submucous fibrosis. There is an increase in the reactive oxygen nitrogen species. And so what mesenchymal cells do is they upregulate NADPH, quinone oxidoreductase 1, glutathione reductase. And because of this, along with superoxide dismutase, which is very important, they all do scavenging of the free radicals. That means they decrease the oxidative stress. And this is a major contributor towards reverting back the oxidative stress which is present in this condition. Angiogenetic potential. As the stages of oral submucous fibrosis advance, there is more and more fibrosis. And because of the increase in the fibrosis, the decrease in the angiogenesis, that is the decrease in the blood supply and formation of newer blood supply to this area. So when mesenchymal cells intervene, they secrete pro-angiogenetic factors like vascular endothelial growth factors, PDGF, angiopoietic factor 1, placental growth factors. All these are responsible for recruiting all the angiogenesis properly and repairing of the tissues. So because of this increased blood supply, there is repair of the tissues which happens, and we can take care of the fibrosis which is present. The last effect is protection against EMT transition. EMT is epithelial to mesenchymal transition. Now, this is the TGF beta and the hypoxia inducible factor, which increases in oral submucous fibrosis. They mediate this epithelial to mesenchymal transition, which causes oral submucous fibrosis. And the mesenchymal cells, the exosomes which are derived from this, they reduce the EMT, suggesting a reversal of EMT transition, which has been not studied presently in oral submucous fibrosis, but has been studied in liver fibrosis and also in kidney repair. So we can use obviously the same concept behind the reversal of fibrosis, which happens in kidney and liver, to the oral submucous connective tissue, wherein the same effect can be expected. So now, where do we get these stem cells from? We have dental origin and non-dental origin. From the oral cavity, the stem cells can be obtained from the dental follicle, the pulp, the period ligament space, the apical papilla, the periodontal ligament, and from the pulp of the exfoliated teeth. All these cells which are obtained from all these lesions are capable of multi-differentiation into many cell types like odontoblast, osteoblast, chondrocyte, adipocyte, monocyte. So because of their multi-differentiation potential, the stem cells obtained from the tooth and the surrounding structures are very capable of future clinical application. So let's see the very first one, the dental pulp stem cell. These are the mesenchymal type of stem cells inside the dental pulp. They have osteogenic and chondrogenic potential in vitro. That means in laboratory studies, they have shown a very promising osteogenic and chondrogenic potential, and they can differentiate into dentine in vivo and also differentiate into dentine pulp-like complex. So some studies wherein some patient studies have showed that they are capable of forming this dentine pulp-like complex, which is very essential for a tooth formation. These cells are putative candidates for dental tissue engineering because of easy surgical access to collection site and very low morbidity after extraction. These cells can generate more typical dentin tissues within a very short period of time. They can be safely cryopreserved and recombined with many scaffolds, and they possess immunoprivilege and anti-inflammatory abilities favorable for transplantation experiments. So whatever is required for transplantation is what these type of cells do provide us with. The second type is stem cells from the human exfoliated deciduous teeth. They were first discovered by Songtao Shi in 2003. Then later it was confirmed that these cells were able to differentiate into a variety of cell types to a greater extent than the dental pulp stem cells, including osteoblast-like, odontoblast-like cells, adipocytes, and even neural cells. Type of stem cells present in this type in the human exfoliated deciduous teeth are two: adipocytes and chondrocytes and osteoblasts. So we can use them to grow intact teeth-like structures, and they have been shown to grow into intact teeth-like structures in animals. So there are some advantages of banking this stem cells from the human exfoliated teeth, because it's simple, painless technique to isolate them, and being an autologous transplant, they don't possess any risk of immune rejection. And so there is no immunosuppressive therapy which might be required. They may also be useful for close relatives of the donor, such as grandparents, parents, and siblings. The banking is more economical when compared to cord blood, or maybe complementary to cord blood cell banking. And the most important is the cells are not subjected to the same ethical concerns as the embryonic stem cells. So when we talk about embryonic stem cells, because of the legal issues in obtaining and storing such cells, these stem cells have no ethical concern. So it is much more easier to work upon them. Next is stem cells from the apical papilla. Apical papilla is the soft tissue which is present at the apex of the roots before the apex of the root completely forms. And so mesenchymal stem cells residing in the apical papilla of permanent teeth with immature roots are known as the stem cells from apical papilla. They are capable of forming odontoblast-like cells, producing dentine in vivo, and likely cell source of primary odontoblast for the formation of root dentine. So dentine is a very important part when we are thinking of formation of an entire tooth from stem cells. So these cells have been shown effectively to form dentine-like structures. They also support apexogenesis, which can occur in infected immature permanent teeth with periradicular periodontitis or abscess. That means they're still present even if the pulp tissue has been infected. At the apical papilla, we can still find these cells. And these cells residing in the apical papilla, they survive pulp necrosis because of their proximity to the periapical tissue vasculature. So they still receive vasculature and supply from the periapical tissues. So even if the pulp is necrosed, we can still find viable cells at the apical papilla. Fourth is the periodontal ligament stem cells. Theo et al. Described the presence of multipotent postnatal stem cells in the human perial ligament space. So when these were transplanted into rodents, they had capacity to generate a cementum or perial-like structure and contributed to periodontal tissue repair. So like other stem cells which we saw till now were more into dentine formation, but these stem cells are very capable of forming the cementum and the perial ligament-like structure, which is the supporting structure of the tooth. These cells can be isolated from cryopreserved perial ligaments while retaining the stem cell characteristics. The last is a non-dental origin stem cell which comes from the bone marrow. The bone marrow derived mesenchymal stem cells originate from the mesoderm. They can be obtained from several other sources like the synovial membrane or the periosteum or from the iliac crest or from the bone marrow of long bones. These mesenchymal stem cells have successfully been used to repair spinal cord injury and to restore the feeling and movement of paralyzed human patients. Along with this, there have been some studies which have shown promising effects in inflammatory conditions like oral submucous fibrosis and many other mucosal diseases as well. These bone marrow mesenchymal stem cells are able to perform or form in vivo cementum, perial ligament, and alveolar bone after implantation into defective periodontal tissues. Thus, they provide a very good alternative source of mesenchymal stem cells for the treatment of periodontal diseases. Though we know that these stem cells have been so important and have promising properties and have shown good results in animal models, but there have been a lot of obstacles for bringing these therapy or bringing this kind of a treatment to actual clinical practice. One is any scientific or medical advancement which is happening has to be carefully policed so in order to make it more safe and more ethical. And then the most important thing which is required before we use stem cell therapy very easily into our clinical practices, we have to fully understand the mechanism by which the stem cells function. First, in the animal models, this step is very important, cannot be avoided, because once the animal models show us the complete understanding and reaction, only then we can do proper clinical trials wherein we can ascertain how effectively they can be used to cure so many conditions. The future stem cell therapies may be a significant obstacle. Why? Because when we want to transplant fully functional organs made from stem cell therapy, it will require creation of millions of working and biologically accurate cooperating cells. So bringing such complicated procedures together will require interdisciplinary and international collaboration. Then identification and proper isolation of the stem cells is also very important, and it's another challenge. Because immunological reaction is a major barrier to such successful transplantation. With certain type of stem cells and procedures, the immune system may recognize these stem cells as foreign bodies and they can trigger immune reaction, resulting in rejection. So we have to first make a fail-safe strategy wherein even if such a rejection is happening, there has to be some self-destruction option which can be much more safe to have in place. Further development and versatility of stem cells may cause reduction in the treatment cost for people suffering from currently incurable diseases. So when they are facing certain organ failures, instead of undergoing extraordinarily expensive drug treatment, the patient would be utilizing stem cell therapy, which will also reduce the post drug therapy which the patient is now subjected to. So although these challenges are present with using stem cell therapy, but every day we are advancing further to use this more and more into our clinical practice. These are some clinical trials which are ongoing, and very few which have been completed as regards to stem cells all over the world. We can see some from India, from Japan, China, all over the world is contributing towards using stem cells and having clinical trials, which is the next step, because animal models have been already done with, and all these hypotheses which have been proposed is on the basis of the animal model. So we are now targeting all the clinical studies wherein we can prove or we can ascertain the properties of stem cells into how they react when actually placed into a human tissue. These are some of the trials which are completed, and the target diseases for these trials were bone marrow diseases, craniofacial abnormalities, some dental diseases, eye conditions, and periodontal conditions, xerostomia, like in Sjogren syndrome. So these are some completed trials, though very few. So if we see the perspective of this trial is, we can almost have, if you find out online, we can see about 6,000 clinical trials which are going on stem cells. But amongst this, only 44 registered clinical trials correlate with the oral disease and oral stem cells worldwide. And most of them are not completed and they do not provide any results. The two main obstacles for this is, one is how to get enough stem cells so that in order to have direct differentiation of stem cells into functional tissues. And the second is to set up an optimized condition that the isolated stem cells will proliferate and expand to the required amount, but not differentiate into any other stem cell variety. So this is the worldwide distribution of how many trials have been started, but the first initial number suggests only a number in a single digit, which shows hardly any which have really completed and given us any results. So remedies in the medical field are always a result of inquisitiveness to know something and then either duplicate it or replace it. Those studies have confirmed that the effectiveness of stem cells therapy in conditions like oral submucous fibrosis and many other life-threatening and disfiguring defects, the research is mainly confined to animal models, and more well-planned human trials are needed to ascertain its role in clinical trials. Each day we are progressing further in this aspect, and stem cell therapy definitely will give us more simple, definitive, and effective treatment for most oral submucous fibrosis and related mucosal diseases. Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like any questions in case if anyone has any doubts. Thank you so much, sir, for giving this opportunity.
Thank you, Professor, for sharing your valuable time and for joining this webinar. Now, I would like to thank all our sponsors and coordinators. I would also like to thank our president. We will be happy to hear your comments and compliments or suggestion at our Facebook and Twitter page. This video will be available shortly in our YouTube channel. Kindly subscribe our official YouTube channel, iRaj Conferences and Seminars, for all past and upcoming webinars and expert lectures. Thank you all. See you on another webinar soon.